going over there as American Marines that basically the Afghan soldiers were just the same as us. And that it was kind of like looking into a foggy mirror here. If we just cleaned off the stuff on the front of the mirror, then we'd see another guy looking back at us. And in the end, we found out that it wasn't anything like a mirror image of what we were looking at. That somebody totally different, playing from a very different script than what we do. So, Josh is going to talk to you briefly about the big implications of where that left us for the rest of it.
Hey, good evening. My name is Josh mcilvoy. I served with Doug in Afghanistan. I was the logistics advisor to our embedded training team. I'm going to take you one step higher from the experience that Doug and I just showed about the individual level to the small organizational level. This isn't broad sweeping politics. It's just what happens when you take that interaction to the organization that you're expected to develop. I am a prior Marine logistics officer. I have 16 years of formal education and 6 years of military experience. My job in Afghanistan was as a member of a team of about 22 people. I was directly responsible for training and teaching about 10 Afghan officers. They were in charge of doing logistics for 2 units that came out to a combined total of about 300 Afghan soldiers, all on our camp, which was the headquarters for a unit, a brigade, which in total, covering the whole battle space, had about 5,000 Afghan soldiers. And I was also responsible for about $4.5 million of camp construction and maintenance, including a box of several bajillion Afghanis. They were bright blue and printed by the press, the money printing press in Britain. Adapting to Afghanistan, as Doug showed, what we come into organizationally is a lot of people who were rarely formally educated at all. If they were formally educated, it was generally to about the 3rd grade level, and if they had any military training whatsoever, proper military training, it was Soviet military training. They were also an ethnically diverse group of pretty highly charged racists. The ethnic and language groups of Afghanistan are as you can see, the colors. If you take what you know historically about, say, the racial discord in the American South in the 60s, but instead of having a racial discord between a majority of one race and a minority of another race, take it where you've got about 6 different races, none hold a majority, and they all speak a different language from each other, but keep the discord. That's the sort of thing that you have in Afghanistan organizationally, and how it applies to us is just within our own unit. We have the commander, who's a Hazara, about 10% of the population. His second in command was a Pashtun. The third in command was also a Pashtun, who the commander was pretty well convinced at all times that they were plotting to destroy his command and have him removed or killed so that they could take over the unit. At the same time, our interpreters were of different ethnicities, so there was no trust for the Afghan soldiers didn't trust what the interpreters were telling us and the interpretation because they were from different ethnicities as well. So you add all of these complications into just simple communication, just like we showed here. Just trying to pass really basic information back and forth verbally. And then you add on to that the literacy rate. For the entire population, it's about 28%. For Helmand province, it's about 20%. And for various reasons, in the Army itself, it's about 14% at a 1st grade level. I consider myself to have been a really exceptionally well-educated 1st grader when I was 6. But I don't think that I would have counted as literate at that time. So I want to be sure what this statistic means, to be literate at a 1st grade level. And you see it out in town. As you're driving around, there's a picture, all these pictures are mine, by the way. The yellow tint comes from the window of the The kids are everywhere, but there are no schools. The few schools that do exist are usually foreign funded, and they're trying to push them into existence, but without the military presence and the humanitarian presence, they wouldn't exist at all, at least not in this area. So I invite you for just a few moments to consider your life having never read anything. Omit from your mind everything you've ever read and imagine what you know now at your stage in life, at your age, and what you do, but nothing that you've ever read applies. For me personally, it's nearly impossible. I can't even imagine what it would be like to be a 30-year-old Afghan who's never read a word. Any words that they happen to recognize will be in Arabic, and they'll be from the Quran, and it'll be pure recognition, not actual literacy. And how that affects us at the organizational level is in things like this. This is a series of documents. These are actual documents pertaining to some pretty important things in the Afghan logistics system. How do you move information through a unit, through an army, even through an organization of 4 or 5 different people spread over just like a small camp? When they can't reliably read, or as we showed, when what they do read is interpreted so differently because they're functioning off of totally different educational levels or ethnic interpretations and understandings of what these things could mean. So you've got your ethnic breakdown along with illiteracy, and then you start to come into this took me a while to discover in talking to the soldiers, is their different way of understanding how the world works, and this is a little more complex. In the US, we understand land, labor, capital, and technology combined together, and that's how we create wealth. And so, given a certain amount of resources that you can have more by applying energy to one of these inputs, and that way we can all be better off. In Afghanistan, they don't think that way. And this is important when you're trying to do logistics and organizational development for them, because they see land and goods as all available resources, and labor for them, the work that they do, in every situation I came across, was simply a way of competing with other people from other tribes, or even just within the office, for goods and resources that already exist. There's no concept of wealth creation, and the idea that we can all be better off if we all do some work, if we all work together, everyone here can have a better camp, can have more stuff from your own supply system. This can all be made to work if you will just get to work. But in their mind, that interpretation is simply, who has what I need and how do I take it from them? Additionally, they're an extraordinarily fatalistic society. And at first that seems like a kind of a big picture philosophical difference that isn't really important at the level I was working at. What difference does it make when he feels he's powerless to control? We're just trying to do basic military logistics, but it has an effect when you say something like to one of the supposedly well-educated younger soldiers that I was advising, I need you to be responsible for your own unit's fuel consumption and reporting, so that we can start getting deliveries. You won't be dependent on the US anymore for this. And he went off on a pretty long spiel about how he needs more oil wells in his country. He totally agrees with me. We just need to drill more oil wells. At first I thought he was making an excuse or just ranting politically, but after over some time you start to realize that what he's getting at is that he doesn't even realize that he's not powerless to control certain things in his unit. He believes that he is. He thinks that we're talking about big picture things when we're not. We're talking about just getting to work, filling out your forms correctly. He doesn't perceive it that way. Additionally, there's or perhaps because of all of these factors, there's a significant difference in the way an Afghan, and therefore an Afghan organization, interprets and understands how things are caused. We have a pretty innate understanding most of the time of the difference between correlation and causation and the relationships between things in our lives. Afghans see it totally different. So when a huge plume of really dark black smoke comes up because the Afghan tents are waterproofed with kerosene, We go moving across the camp, we're calling the fire department. We need to put out this fire, obviously. And in the middle of the tent, this is during Ramadan, when they're not supposed to be eating during the day, is this little, it's kind of hard to see, but that little black dot on the right picture is the stove on top of a propane tank. That was right in the middle of the kerosene-soaked tent. So I approached it, I pointed it out to my boss, sir, this is probably not unrelated to the tent fire. And my boss goes and finds the most senior Afghan, one of the Pashtuns that I was showing you, because the general was, as we alluded to, on leave. And he points it out to the executive officer of the brigade. The executive officer's, what? What are you pointing? No concept of causation that this could have been the result. And when we pointed out to him just bluntly, this is what started the fire, he said, no, it's Ramadan. How could this possibly have started the fire? Probably because your soldiers aren't as Muslim as you think. They're eating in their tents. Just a totally different way of viewing the world. I personally never came around to their way of viewing the world. It was too much of a stretch for me. What I did recognize was that I recognized that limitation. I don't know how you think things happen when all I know is how I think things and my understanding of causation. I'm still not sure what they think started that fire. So, taking all of these sort of concepts together, I'm going to give you a how-to guide on how to build a 1,500-foot deep water well in the middle of the desert. The schematic looks something like this. There's sleeves and tubes, and there's a layer of concrete and a layer of clay. It was a bit of a challenge to design because I don't know how to build a water well, and I was expected to. My workforce was some Afghan contractors. It was a requirement to use Afghan contractors because of the counterinsurgency rules. So I'm trying to teach my version of how a water well goes to some Afghan contractors who have the equipment but have, like we talked about a third grade level education. That big tube is it's the main pump for the water well. Since they're mostly illiterate, after they installed the pump, they threw away the manual. I have no idea what kind of pump is in there because they forgot to give me the manual. They didn't realize that it would be important to me after the pump was installed because they're not used to a society that depends on literature. It all got installed, it started to work, and it pumped mud that looked like chocolate milk for about a month or two. I don't quite remember how long it took. And eventually, by doing some things that I had managed to find a hydrogeologist somehow, and got in contact with him, and he made some recommendations, which eventually cleared up the water. These are the guys that are in charge, that were responsible for the construction. That's the foreman and the owner of the company that was building the well. The owner of the company is a Tajik. He is there and not his brother. I don't have a picture of his brother because the general of our unit, who's a Hazara, threatened to kill his brother while me and my boss were both in the room. So his brother was ejected from the Afghan camp. We didn't see him anymore because it was a legitimate death threat. So back to the ethnic problems. Eventually, it came out to look like that. That's the inside. I know it's a little hard to see. It was 20,000 gallons, and we were expected, to teach it, went the wrong way, to the Afghan soldiers, how to use it. And if, just kind of conceptualizing, what happens to a pump when you run it when there's not water in the system? How does pressure work when you've got different layers? It's not really that complex, water pressure, keeping pressure up in a system, in a closed system, stuff like that. But it was really, really difficult to teach it, the Afghans. You can't see it that well, but one of the soldiers who is being instructed is standing on the valve. That was the challenge. Just, at least don't stand on it. If you can't run it, just don't break it. That was still a bit of a challenge. The end result of the water well debacle was, in over a year and over $1 million, a 20,000 gallon capacity being pulled from 1,000 feet below was not functional within 3 months of my team leaving the camp. That's the